Okay, so welcome back to the next video. Now, I said we'll talk about public as well as private. And each time you're public, who doesn't know what public is? Who doesn't know what private is, right? So we said that a public IP address is assigned to a device or router that directly connects to the internet. It is globally unique and routable over the internet, right? Routable over the internet. For example, when your router connects to the internet, it uses a public IP address assigned by your internet service provider. I'm going with Spectrum. Someone might be going with how they call AT&T. Someone might be going with T-Mobile. For you in Africa, I think the most one, a lot of people go with MTN. In Europe, I really don't know much. But depending on your service provider. So again, this is such an example of what we are saying, right? So your router connects to the internet and we will use a public address assigned by your internet service provider already have a public address for that device that that router will be able to use it, right? And if we look at the private IP addresses, again, these are used within a network or a private networks and are not routable over the internet, right? You hear the word routable, they are not because it's confined within the private network. But once you go over the internet, then it's routable. These addresses are reserved for use in local networks like within your home, offices, and so on. For example, devices in your home, such as laptops and smartphones, typically use a private IP address that we can see. For example, these are all examples of the IP addresses that we've been talking about. Example, this is your home network, right? And you have different IP addresses, 168, 1.2, 168, 1.3, 168, 1.4, and you have your private IP address, but each time it's going to the router, you have what they call NAT. You guys already know that network address translation. Then it will also help that max or translate your IP address to a public address. But how does IP address work, right? It says first, IP addresses are used to route data between devices over a network. When you send or receive data, the sender and receiver must know which other IP addresses to ensure the correct delivery, right, of that data. And the cost of doing so, it goes through routing. First, the router uses the IP address to forward data package from one network to another, like how a postal service uses an IP or an address to send mail to the correct location. For example, when you access a website, the data is routed from the website server to your router, which forward the data to your device using an IP address. Okay, so that makes sense. And this is just a typical example of what we'll be discussing about. So you have that going through the internet using data packets and, going over the internet, the data, you see, like that line is just the arrow that the router will be able to use it. Once that information is sent, the router will determine the best route. This is a route, this is a route, this is a route, this is a route. So which order, like literally the best route that the router can send that packet, that's exactly what we're saying. But how devices obtain IP addresses, right? So with this, we also said that you have what they call you have static IP addresses and you also have dynamic IP addresses. And each time you have static means unchanged, it's stagnant, it doesn't change, right? And that's why I say a static IP address is manually assigned to a device and does not change over time. It's often used for devices like servers or printers that need a fixed address. For example, a website hosting a website or a web server hosting a website might be assigned a static IP address, like us, our hosting provider or service is GoDaddy. They are the one hosting our website, right? And then we can also talk of dynamic. Every time we talk of dynamic, what does it mean? It automatically assigned by a dynamic host configuration protocol. And as I said, I'll definitely try to tell some of the different protocols and port for you all to understand what it really means, right? And can change over time Most devices in home networks are assigned dynamic IP addresses. For example, when you connect your laptop to your home Wi-Fi, your router assigns it as a dynamic IP address. Do you see that? So your router definitely assign it. So this is a typical example device with static IP address, router, server, and then if we start talking about dynamic that will route or change, then we can see that, okay? Okay, so that being said, and then let's also touch base on NAT. I know we've talked about NAT, so we'll talk about NAT and then talk about subnetting and the like. So with NAT, this is something that we'll discuss in depth as of now, we already know. But what are some like what is it? Why do we need it? Why is it important? First, we said that it's translate a private IP address to a public IP address. Again, for security purposes, this conserve the limited supply of course, public IP addresses and improve network security by hiding internal network devices from outside world. For example, in a home network, all devices use private IP addresses, but when they access the internet, they use the router's public IP addresses via NAT, right? And this is a typical example of all what we've been discussing, right? We have those private IP addresses, you see 10, 20, 30. And one thing I want you all to pay attention, I want you to take note of this number. If you realize that this number, they are pretty much be constant. And that's when we'll go to subnetting, we'll try and see why do we have this. But the one that keep changing, you have 10, you have 20, you have 30, right? Depending on the different devices that we do have. And with the help of NAT, NAT will be able to translate these IP addresses from private to public when we are accessing the internet. So that brings us to the end of this difference between private as well as public IP addresses, and we briefly touch based on that. But let's go and talk about subnetting and IP addresses, IP address management. What does it really mean? Again, do not forget to like, comment, subscribe, like our videos, and share it with your friends. Thank you.